Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Night Stranger back on the channel, and I was just thinking about something really, really interesting. I was like, it's crazy how many emotions we experience each day, and like each moment of the day, we're literally going through something new. Cause I can recall so many things that just happened today. Like this morning, I was very pumped. I was like, you know what, I can do everything in this world. And then like 20 minutes ago, I was like so defeated, I was like, damn, like the world's rough and that. And like right now I was like really pensive, I was like I was literally thinking about this question. I was like, how would you navigate between being egoistic and being narcissistic versus being way too insecure about yourself, feeling imposter syndrome, and stuff like that. Because it's really interesting. Because I think this question fits in to the horseshoe political spectrum very well. Because you know the thing where like you have a horseshoe, yeah, and like for politics, there's basically on two ends of extremes you have communism and fascism, right? Communism is the right, no, fascism and communism, right? And people think it's like a spectrum where you go 1 to 10 or like something like that. But it's not that. It's like it goes 1 to -5 and it goes 1 to 5, right? Does that make sense? Sorta, right? Cause then like you go like a horseshoe, like 1 to 5, then 1 to -5, then 1 to 5, right? Because if it's going 1 to 10, there's definitely a straight line. So it's actually really interesting because I was like, isn't having imposter syndrome just being insecure, but isn't being egoistic and trying to cover up that insecurity with something else just narcissism, right? And that's really interesting because we all know that the golden mean is being humble, right? Humility is the golden mean. And I guess like we should all be striving towards a person who is humble but realize that they're capable of great things, right? And this is very different from an egoistic person who thinks that, oh, because they have no knowledge of what they are capable of. It's very different saying the empty words of, oh, I can do this, versus an articulated way of saying it, a thought through a response. You know what? I can do this because, Like I feel like many narcissistic people, the difference between being humbly confident, and being narcissistic is just that people who are narcissistic say empty words and do not evaluate what they can actually do themselves. And the complete opposite for people who have low self-esteem, people who have imposter syndrome, they just also do not evaluate whether they are capable of doing something, but they jump to the conclusion that, oh, I cannot do it. They are better than me. I am not enough. These are just two different mindsets of looking at the question. Like, I'm neglecting the fact that I am not evaluating who I am, then I'm just making a rash decision about whether I can do something or not, which is obviously what you're not trying to do in the world, right? But I just thought about something really interesting. I was like, what do I think about? I don't know, but that represents my belief that they're on a horseshoe, because realistically it's just trying to say the same thing. You guys are just both really insecure, right? Because you're either insecure by covering it up, or you are insecure by not covering it up. I don't know which one's better. Because on the surface level, you can say that obviously, like, if you try to cover up with something else, then it's worse, because you're not admitting the fact that you cannot do something, right? You're not admitting to the fact that you acknowledge your true capabilities. However, isn't it also just as bad if you're just outright have low self-esteem? Because Because by saying I cannot do something, surely you're also covering up your true capabilities by undermining yourself, right? And I have a really interesting question. This is what I just thought about. I was like, could egoism actually be good? Could egoism actually help you achieve more things because you're more confident in yourself, so you just try to do more? I'm not actually sure, because my friend keeps on reiterating this to myself. He says, oh, we need to have a big ego, we need to have a big ego. But do we? But obviously we realize that the most successful people in the world deals with people. Like, I would not have it any other way. The most successful people get to their success and retains their success by their ability to deal with other people. Because whether you take Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, whoever, they are in control of many, many people. It's their social skills. Ultimately, I am saying it is their ability to control a lot of people that make them successful ultimately, right? And humility is crucial in this role of dictating other people, in this role of trying to create a well-bonded, well-versed, but also goal-driven mindset within your employees, right? So surely that is crucial. However, but the thing is, I realize that there are also successful leaders and successful individuals that do have an ego. That is really interesting. But would it work with leaders if you're very egoistic? Because by definition, egoism means that you are not assessing yourself to a decent enough degree that you can have full certainty that you can actually do it or do something. But you're also not assessing the enemy or whoever is opposing you, whatever obstacle you come up. Because life is all about getting through obstacles, right? Like, life throws at you a bunch of obstacles. So if you're not evaluating the enemy enough, you can't have an egoistic leader, because because what I was thinking is that if you don't evaluate your enemy enough, let's say Bill Gates was going against Steve Jobs. By not evaluating Steve Jobs enough, Bill Gates cannot rise to the top. In this entrepreneurial world and in this, in the 21st century, I do agree with myself that you cannot rise to the top without evaluating yourself and the enemy, knowing it through and through, especially through utilizing the World Wide Web, right? The internet, right? You have to know the enemy to climb to the top. But how do you explain people who just win the lottery? Surely that's just luck, right? So they're okay. There are more things than your inner condition. Okay, that makes sense. There's more things in your internal condition that dictates yourself, such as luck. Okay, I should have arrived at that point a bit earlier, but that's really interesting. But I do also stand by, you cannot retain it, right? The premise was that you can get successful and not retain it. I was talking about two things. I was talking about success, about rising, and why it necessitates humility, and retaining something. This even more necessitates humility, because let's say you win the lottery. Let's say you win one battle in a battlefield. You must have the ability to win the next one, right? Same thing with money. You must have the ability to, let's say, this is a really interesting analogy. It's like John Locke proposes this analogy. It's actually really interesting. There are two different people. There is the prince and there is the cobbler. Locke said if you switch the consciousness or the brain of the prince with the consciousness of the cobbler, let's say now the prince's brain is in the cobbler's body, the cobbler, who now has the prince's brain, would still identify themselves as the prince. Hence, even if the cobbler's consciousness was within the prince's body and everyone can look at him and say, oh, this is Prince Ali Ababwa, the prince would still think like a cobbler. He would still have this lowly mindset that he is supposed to work for other people instead of dictating the lives of other people. And that's where it goes wrong. Because at the end of the day, everything comes back to this mindset. Obviously, the first realm of uncovering mindsets come into the idea of whether you're egoistic, you're suffering from imposter syndrome, or you're humble. The second realm is how you look at the world, is how do you hold yourself, you know? It's like a rich man, a man who made his wealth, knows that all his money needs to go to different banks with different passcodes or whatever, right? That's probably a simple thing that a person who may have not had that amount of wealth never realized. And by going to banks, you collect interest, which give you more money, and that's the successful loop that helps the rich person obtain all the monetary value, right? So for a poor person who won the lottery, for example, that is never possible because they never had the quantity and level of education, right? So going back to Locke's example of a cobbler's consciousness in the prince's body, even if you now have the wealth, have the gems, have the rubies, have the sapphires of the prince, you have the title of the prince, other people call you a prince. Trust me, after 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, you cannot retain that title because people will realize your etiquette, the way you hold yourself, the way you articulate is different from that of a prince. So going back to my first point, humility is so important within a person. If you are not humble as a person, sure, you could say, I could succeed, but you cannot retain that success. You cannot continue to build that success, right? That's really interesting. That's why humility is so important, because as a person, if you do not understand your enemy, you can get away with one blunder from your enemy, but you can't get away with multiple blunders because multiple blunders aren't happening, right? Because even luck runs out. Personally, that's how the universe works. Like, sure, we might have seen a black swan event in our lives, right? Like, let's say you've seen a solar eclipse. Sure, I have no way of proving that this is impossible, but I'm just gonna say it right here. There's almost no way you see a solar eclipse on Monday, then on Tuesday, then on Wednesday, then on Thursday, then on Friday. That's what we're trying to prove if we're saying that a person who is egoistic is going to make it to the top, then climb further. That is exactly what we're trying to insinuate, which is crazy. But obviously, like, we need to deal with another issue here, because it's really interesting. So let's say a person who is egoistic does manage to get lucky once, but this person becomes humble enough to try to educate himself when he receives a success. Let's say this guy wins this lottery for £3 million. Then precedingly, he uses this money for an online educational program about how to retain your wealth. And let's say hypothetically, this guy ends up retaining his wealth. Does this mean that the now humble person, the person who is actually finding more out about himself and his wealth, different? Is this humble person different from the initial very egoistic guy? Because if we can prove that the humble person at the end is the same person as the egoistic person at the front, we can actually make the argument that a person who is egoistic could actually get you to the second step to earn this amazing wealth, to get to this amazing place, to see these amazing people, whilst actually in the end managing to become humble and retain that wealth. Because if that is possible, then I actually in some circumstances, I would agree with the fact that an egoistic person might actually be a good trait to have, you know? Because that blind confidence pushes you to go further than what is necessarily possible if a humble person were to assess himself and to assess the enemy. Therefore, proving that irrationality could triumph over rationality, which is very interesting. I guess we would all like to believe that irrationality can triumph over rationality, right? Interesting. Yeah, I think that I'll end it like that. I do agree with the initial proposition that you can't have an egoistic person go on to do great things. But that has to fall under the premise that this egoistic person, once reached success, can become humble. Yeah, I think I ended like that. That's really interesting. Because maybe that would actually be the ideal life to lead. Because you say, hey, nothing is impossible, so I'm going to give it my all. And maybe that giving it all is the difference. Maybe that's the difference maker. Maybe the journey. Hey, how about you say you don't get lucky? Even let's put out the extenuating factor that you get lucky. And you just say that because you are this egoistic guy, and because you refuse to analyze yourself as an enemy, you just say, I'm going to go on and do it. I'm going to work my ass off and do it. That then, is that egoism though? Because that's humility enough to work. Nah, that's egoism, right? Surely that's egoism. Because you're stupid enough to not listen to any advice, right? Because if you're stupid enough to not listen to any advice and go for it, surely that's egoism. And what's the difference between egoism and narcissism, right? Ooh. Semantically, they're quite similar, no? I would guess. But I don't know. That's really interesting. I'll leave that question to you. I was just feeling like a debate between humility, egoism, and imposter syndrome today. Because I was feeling imposter syndrome at night, then I was feeling extremely egotistical at the start of the day. So maybe I was trying to justify my egotism. I don't know. But I do know that it never hurts to be humble. Not even that. It's not even never hurts to be humble. It's great to be humble. Viewers, if you're watching this, just be humble and assess yourself and assess the enemy. On occasional times, you could be egotistical, but let's say that most of the times, I do think that it doesn't work out. However, on certain times, hey, just do it. Just do it. All right, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.